Much of the UK may be getting on with Brexit, but nowhere are its effects more divisive than in Northern Ireland, and no political group is angrier about them than the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party. Its target is the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, a device which keeps Northern Ireland both in the UK and for trade purposes in the EU single market at the same time. Complicated? Yes, very. But the aim was simple enough: to prevent a hard border between the North and the Irish Republic and to protect the Good Friday Agreement. My guest this week from County Antrim in Northern Ireland is Sammy Wilson, the DUP's Chief Whip at the Parliament in Westminster. And he wants that protocol scrapped. You were the one who a year ago called for guerrilla warfare to destroy the protocol, didn't you? You stand by that?
I do, of course.
In less than 3 months there'll be elections to the Northern Ireland Assembly, but the DUP won't say what it will do if it loses to the nationalist Sinn Fein party. So the stability of the political institutions, never that strong, is once again on the line. What do the people make of it? What about business? And why has the DUP been meeting an umbrella group for loyalist paramilitaries when all parties pledged to see the back of them? All that and more on Conflict Zone. Sammy Wilson, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Let's look first, if we may, at the Northern Ireland Protocol, which seems to be the main object of your party's displeasure at the moment, if I can call it that way. You've talked about the damage it's doing to the integrity and sovereignty of the UK, to Northern Ireland's constitutional position, the peace process, the economy. In other words, a complete disaster, right?
It is. And of course, that's not just a view shared by my party. That's shared by the whole of the unionist community and all of the parties which represent the unionist community. I think the most apparent damage to citizens is the impact which it has on our economy. And secondly, of course, and this is much more important as far as I'm concerned, the damage which it does to the constitutional relationship between Northern Ireland and the rest of the country to which we belong.
Okay, can we take the economy first? If it's such a disaster, how is it that the economic output of Northern Ireland reached a 13-year high last summer? It's now an estimated 3% bigger than it was before COVID. The value of Northern Ireland's exports to the Republic of Ireland was almost €4 billion last year, an increase of 65% over 2020. Where's the damage to that?
Well, I think that the damage is, first of all, you've got to look at Northern Ireland's position relative to the rest of the country to which we belong. The United Kingdom has done well, of course, out of Brexit. Exports have gone up quite substantially because of trade deals. And Northern Ireland, of course, is an exporting region within the United Kingdom because we have such a small local market. And secondly, of course, there's been huge amounts of money pumped in to the Northern Ireland economy as a result of the government's action against COVID. And many businesses, and I've been with some businesses this morning, and they've told me that because of the input reduction in taxes, grants, etc., that even with COVID, they've done very well.
So where's the disaster? Where's all the damage that you're talking about? I mean, in fact, we have the managing director of a firm in Dunmurry called Brookvent on the outskirts of Belfast. He says, where are the job losses? Where are the factory closures? Where's the evidence to support this idea that the protocol has damaged Northern Ireland? He doesn't see it.
Well, and of course, one of the reasons why there has not been a huge reduction in unemployment is because the United Kingdom, having left the EU, has got higher growth than most other European countries, and we're now back to unemployment levels which were pre-COVID levels. The damage to the economy has been in a number of ways. First of all, we have higher inflation in Northern Ireland because the cost of bringing goods into Northern Ireland has gone up by about 25%. Secondly, many goods which used to be available to us are no longer available. Companies are struggling with supply chains because companies in England have refused to supply to Northern Ireland due to the increased paperwork and the delays with customs checks. And of course, that has meant that the variety of goods available has been reduced. And individuals across Northern Ireland have found it difficult to obtain goods without having customs duties imposed on them, even though those goods are coming from other parts of the United Kingdom. Yet we have customs duties imposed on goods which are coming into another part of the United Kingdom.
Well, you seem to find that more onerous than the public, because at the end of last October, the regular poll from Queen's University Belfast showed a slim majority of voters, 52%, agreeing or strongly agreeing that the protocol is on balance a good thing for Northern Ireland, up from 43% in 2 polls earlier in the year. So you're swimming against the tide here, aren't you?
No, indeed, we're not swimming against the tide. And, I think that sometimes people's attitudes towards the protocol have been affected by the views that many people have that we should remain within the European Union.
Mr. Wilson, talks are going on between the government and the EU to try and iron out problems with implementing the protocol. You don't have much faith in these talks, do you?
No, I don't, because, of course, the EU have used and abused Northern Ireland throughout this whole withdrawal process. They have talked about the importance of protecting the single market, even though only 4% of the trade which we do goes to the European Union. Very small percentage. Only 5% of the firms in Northern Ireland actually trade with the Irish Republic. And so the chances of leakage into the European single market from Northern Ireland were very, very remote. And
you blame the EU here, but you seem to forget that the British government's fingerprints are on every page of that protocol. The government wasn't forced into the protocol kicking and screaming. It signed it, sealed it, and hailed it as a wonderful achievement, didn't it?
And I don't in any way try to demur from the argument that the UK government was equally to blame for this, because they didn't have to accept the deal which was being put forward by the European Union. I'm simply making the point that the European Union has abused Northern Ireland to try and keep a foot in the door of the UK. And one of the ways in which they've done that, of course, is through the protocol. And in fact, if you look at all of the arguments which the EU make for dealing with the difficulties which the protocol has caused, it's usually, if you would align more with our single market rules, if you would align with our customs rules, then you wouldn't have any difficulty.
It says it's turned its rules upside down and inside out. It's offered to halve the customs paperwork, cut food checks by 80%. It wasn't a take it or leave it offer. It was the basis for further concessions. But you're dead set against it. You were the one who a year ago called for guerrilla warfare to destroy the protocol, didn't you? You stand by that?
I do, of course. And I think
you stand by the language, which was deemed to be pretty incendiary in some quarters.
I totally stand by the language, and I think that maybe you should examine more closely the way in which the European Union behaves, rather than simply accepting the words which they put on paper. Let me give you some examples of this flexible attitude which the European Union applies to checks coming into Northern Ireland. There's supermarkets in Northern Ireland which bring goods from GB, are subject to full checks, yet they don't have one shop in the Irish Republic. So the goods couldn't possibly be going into the Irish Republic or into the single market, yet the EU insists that they go through the full range of checks. If you look at some of the ludicrous ways in which they've applied the protocol, for example, a firm in my constituency which does construction work in Scotland has had its vehicles turned away from the port in Larne because there was soil on the wheels.
Mr. Wilson, your efforts, Mr. Wilson, your efforts to declare the protocol unlawful have been thrown out by the Belfast High Court. Can't you accept that? You've had your days in court. You've made repeated political and legal challenges. If you want to live in a country governed by law, you have to accept that, don't you?
Well, maybe if you would let me finish the answer. You might not like the answer that I give, but on one hand, you try to defend the attitude of the European Union. And yet when I give you examples, petty examples of how the European Union insists on checks being made for goods coming in. I mean, only last week, they were demanding that any passengers coming from GB to Northern Ireland should be searched in case they brought sandwiches in with them into Northern Ireland. And don't tell me that the EU are trying to be flexible. The EU are abusing the people in Northern Ireland for their own political ends. That is to try and undo Brexit and try to ensure that the UK has to align itself to EU regulations. Otherwise, they say they will cut Northern Ireland off from the rest of the United
Mr.
Kingdom.
Wilson, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
That is interference in the internal affairs of the United Kingdom, and I guarantee that no other European country would stand for that. If the EU were to try and encourage separatist movements in Spain or in Germany or in Italy or in any other part of the United Kingdom, those countries would be up in arms about it. And that's why we're angry about the way in which they're trying to split up the United Kingdom.
You've had your day in court. You've had your repeated and political, legal and challenges. If you want to live in a country, I come back to this question, if you want to live in a country governed by law, at some point you have to accept this. Or does democracy mean only accepting the outcomes you like?
Well, again, maybe you should check your facts before you ask the question. We have, the court has not made a decision. The court has simply given an interim decision that until full facts of the case are held, then the checks must go on. That's what the judge said, and of course this judge has a record of being quite pro-EU anyway. But
I was talking about June last year when you had the constitutional arguments brought before the court that the Brexit Withdrawal Act conflicted with the 1800 Acts of Union. Well, that argument was thrown out, wasn't it?
No, again, that's not the final decision of the court. That was a local court made that decision, and made by the same judge who made the decision regarding the checks only a couple of weeks ago. And I would say that there was as much political input in that decision as there was a legal input into it. The fact of the matter is that the government itself has admitted, and indeed its case in court was that it changed the constitution of Northern Ireland by default when it allowed checks to occur between Northern Ireland and GB. The government said that the Act of Union was actually impliedly changed. And yet, oddly enough, the judge made the decision that the Act of Union hadn't been changed, even though the government's own legal argument was that it had changed the Act of Union. That's why the case should not be considered.
Did Boris Johnson lie to your party about the protocol?
Well, he certainly, before he actually had to make the decision himself, made promises that he wouldn't do the things which Theresa May had done. Then, conveniently, because he needed to get a withdrawal agreement, he accepted the same terms as Theresa May had tried to push through the House of Commons and which he had voted against. So yes, he did not, he was not truthful on this, and that's why we're saying he now has an obligation, if he wants to keep the United Kingdom together, if he wants to ensure that the people of Northern Ireland are not treated differently from people in other parts of the United Kingdom, he must then undo the protocol. And don't forget, I mean, you talk about breaking the law. This isn't breaking the law. The protocol itself actually has provision for changes to be made. The political declaration which accompanied it.
So it's not irrevocable. You keep saying it's irrevocable, but it's not irrevocable, the Northern Ireland Protocol, is it?
No, it's not. The EU maintain it's irrevocable. We have said that the protocol itself and the political declaration which accompanied it considered that there would and could be alternatives to it, and we're simply saying to the government, make sure that those alternatives are applied and that the damage which is being done to it is removed.
Well, the terms of the protocol allow the Northern Ireland Assembly to provide consent for EU regulations continuing in Northern Ireland, the first vote to take place for 4 years after the end of the transition, and every 4 years after that if passed by a simple majority. So what's irrevocable about that? It's not. Well, you can vote this out in 3 years' time, can't you, in the Assembly?
Well, first of all, and again, I think you should check your facts on this one before you ask the question, because the terms of the Northern Ireland Assembly were set up on under the Northern Ireland Act, which is a law, have been broken. And they were broken when the protocol was signed, because that vote in the Assembly was meant to be a cross-community vote. And that part, the requirement for a cross-community vote, the law on that has been removed, has been broken, in order to make sure that there is no cross-community consensus for these arrangements. And the fact that not one unionist party in Northern Ireland supports them means that had the law stood and had the Good Friday Agreement stood and the legislation which give effect to the Good Friday Agreement being put in place and kept, in place, then the Northern Ireland Protocol could never have been brought into law. There's another good example of where the rule of law has been subject to change by the Northern Ireland Protocol and by the EU.
Mr. Wilson, your tactics over the protocol aren't winning you much traction in the opinion polls. You're coming up to scheduled Northern Ireland Assembly elections in May. The Lucid Talk Northern Ireland tracker poll, run in the middle of last month, asked for people's first preference, if the elections were tomorrow. Sinn Fein led with 25%. Your party was trailing on 17%. How are you proposing to narrow that gap?
Well, I think that first of all, I would challenge the Lucid Talk poll, and indeed all the pollsters have made very little of it, simply because of the way it was conducted. It was conducted as a survey which people could ring into 3 or 4 times to register their vote and their opinion. So the Lucid Talk poll, I'm not so sure, actually reflects opinion. But nevertheless, we do know that because of the impact that the protocol has had, there's a lot of disillusionment within the unionist community. And I think that we have got to, first of all, make it clear to the unionist population that if they wish there to be continued opposition to the protocol, then they must vote for the party which has been consistently against it, which has actually provided alternatives to it, and which, if it becomes the biggest party in the Assembly after the next election, will not implement it.
Jeffrey Donaldson said a few days ago it was time for the people of Northern Ireland to have their say. If that's true, then isn't it also time for the DUP to tell them exactly what it stands for? And your party hasn't. It hasn't said whether it would nominate someone to serve as Deputy First Minister if Sinn Fein wins the largest number of votes. So will you or won't you accept that if Sinn Fein wins?
Well, I think, first of all, no party, and I can't think of any party either in the United Kingdom or in any other country, would speculate and would take hypothetical questions about losing an election. We're going into this election to win it. We're going in confident that the unionist people in Northern Ireland, when faced with the petty bigotry and sectarian bigotry of Sinn Fein, will make the right decision and will vote for us. So, I mean, why would we go into an election with our heads down, speculating that after the election we might have lost? And what are we going to do in the event of losing? We want to inject confidence into the people in Northern Ireland and to tell them we are out to win, we can win, with your support we will win, and the consequences of not winning are to put in place a party of terrorists who have abused the unionist population, not only physically, but also in terms of their culture, their history, and in
yes, you say that, but Sir Jeffrey Donaldson says it would present a real problem for unionism, if Sinn Fein wins. What exactly is the problem? Taking part in a free and fair election and accepting the result? Is that a problem?
No, I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that if Sinn Fein were to win the election and to be the biggest party, then you can be sure that the very first thing they would demand would be a destabilising referendum on the future of Northern Ireland. And once you have one referendum of that nature, according to the law in Northern Ireland, you have to have one every 7 years. So you then have the destabilising effect of stumbling from one referendum to another. I know that if there was a referendum, all the opinion polls show a referendum tomorrow, 66% of people would stay to remain within the United Kingdom. But the problem would be this, that politics would then be dominated in Northern Ireland as to what happens and how do you change people's opinion or wear them down coming up to the next referendum. A bit like we've seen in Scotland, when the Scottish nationalists have one referendum and lost it, they have been agitating for another and another, and Scottish politics is now dominated by the issue of independence from the United Kingdom, not the issues which affect people on a day-to-day basis, like dealing with the ordinary problems which people want you to deal with. And that's why Jeffrey Donaldson is right. It would be destabilising. It would be a distraction from the real problems which politicians should be seeking to address.
But isn't it also destabilising, Sammy Wilson, that the DUP is currently trying to make up its mind whether its actions, if Sinn Fein wins, would be to collapse the whole power-sharing agreement if you don't get the result you want in the May 5th elections? Is that right? Shows contempt for the democratic process, doesn't it?
No, and again, before you ask the question, maybe it would be better to actually look at what Jeffrey Donaldson said. Jeffrey Donaldson made the point that if the protocol is not dealt with, then it would be impossible to resurrect the institutions for two reasons. First of all, if the institutions were resurrected, there would be a requirement in law to implement the protocol. We will not do that. So we will not have institutions which would implement the protocol if we can stop them being put in operation. And the second reason why he has said that is that the institutions themselves, given the divisiveness of the protocol, could not possibly operate because you never get consensus. So you would never, you would simply have institutions where no decisions would be made because the poison of the protocol would prevent the operation and the smooth operation of the assembly. That was the context in which he said that. And I think that that's only common sense when you look at it in that way.
Let's talk, if we may, about the paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland. There's been some concern that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson recently met a group representing loyalist paramilitary organisations. Why the need to talk to such people?
Well, I think that first of all, if you don't speak to such people and try to convince them that there is a political solution to this problem, and we are pursuing a political solution, then of course you only convince people that the only way of dealing with this is through direct action on the streets. I don't want to see that. I lived through 40 years of that in Northern Ireland.
So the aim was to talk them down from that, was it?
And I think that he has successfully done that. You know, don't forget, people were predicting all kinds of street disorder over the summer. They were surprised that it didn't happen. And it didn't happen as a result of accident, just by accident. It happened as a result of attempts to convince those who may have been prepared to go down that route that, look, give the politicians a chance to try and sort this out. It's one of the reasons why the EU and the UK government have a huge weight of responsibility on their shoulders, because, of course, we're not the ones who can bring about the change in the protocol. Only the EU and the UK government can do that. And they ought to be aware of the very real danger. If politics is not seen to work, then there are who will say, well, stand aside and we'll try and make our contribution.
Mr. Wilson, the Fresh Start Agreement in 2015 committed, among others, the Northern Ireland Executive to bringing paramilitarism to an end once and for all. What has the DUP done to fulfil that commitment? In December 2020, the Independent Reporting Commission said it's a dereliction of duty on all of us to simply allow these organisations to rumble along in our communities, engaging in coercive power and control. Does your party accept its share of responsibility for that dereliction of duty?
No, because I don't think we have been derelict in our duty in that. And indeed, you're only after criticising me or at least impliedly criticising me for our party talking to paramilitaries. We have engaged with paramilitaries in all of our own constituencies. We have sought to try and ensure that rather than involve themselves in trying to create problems, that they get involved in trying to improve their communities. We have even given substantial resources to groups which would be regarded as, and Arlene Foster, our previous leader, was hugely criticised for her engagement with paramilitaries to try and divert them from criminal and paramilitary activities into community activities. And, you know, that's the irony in all of this. On one hand, people say, what are you doing about paramilitaries? And then when you go and talk to them directly to try and convince them that there are other ways in which they can make a positive contribution to society, yet blame for talking to terrorists.
Well, how far away are they from making that positive contribution? Because the Independent Reporting Commission said paramilitarism in Northern Ireland remains a clear and present danger, and it cited 236 instances in the latest financial year where households reported being homeless due to paramilitary intimidation, financial extortion, sexual abuse, paramilitary-style assaults. I mean, how long is this going to go on in Northern Ireland? How do you normalise that situation?
Well, and I think you've also got to recognise that that review pointed out that most of those activities were now carried out by paramilitaries who have now moved on to organised crime. And in every society, of course, doesn't matter which society you're talking about, you'll have organised crime groups The difference is in Northern Ireland, some of those people had access to weapons, etc. They were able to instill fear in their community and still do instill fear in their community. And our argument is that, look, those who wish to change should be encouraged to change, and you should do your best to try and get them involved in activities which are more positive and build up their communities. Those who are not prepared to change then should be treated as criminal gangs and be subject to the same criminal investigations and sanctions as you would have for triads or any other groups, drug dealing groups or whatever in other parts of the kingdom.
All right, unfortunately we're out of time, Sammy Wilson. Thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.